Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay. Middlekauff mailbag time. You guys know the drill. At John Middlekauff is the Instagram. DMs wide open. It's just my name, 2 Fs. Fire in those DMs. Get your question answered here on the show. One little nugget I'm surprised you haven't used given your history with the Eagles. Remember Vince Young touting their dream team? I do. And they accomplished nothing. To discredit Purdy for simply meeting expectations with his stacked team is hilarious. I don't know who's discrediting Purdy, though. That's like, weren't we all on the same page? Beside a couple people that just wanted to argue. He had a great season. He was near the lead in every statistical category at the position. He eviscerated teams like the Cowboys and the Eagles. Was awesome. He's a legit Pro Bowl player in the NFC. That game that we witnessed the other night was not good enough if you're going to be a Pro Bowl player, especially if your defense is going to be shitty. Comparing, Vince Young was the backup quarterback. Like, here's the thing. Vince Young got a little too much credit for saying that. He was a backup. So I don't know what that has to do with Purdy, to be honest with you. As a Detroit Lions fan, I have always struggled with the idea that the only way to win is with an elite quarterback. I watched Stafford do everything he could for years with Calvin Johnson as his number 1 wide receiver, and he could barely get us in the playoffs. Now we're all doing all this with Goff, who everyone says is less talented. That is true. Like, everyone doesn't say that. It's like a fact. Matt Stafford is more physically talented than Jared Goff. Sometimes the word narrative gets thrown around. Like, Josh Allen has more gifts than Brock Purdy. Like, the difference between a narrative, like, can LeBron ever win a championship? Like, that's a narrative. And then there are just like some facts. Matt Stafford, way better arm, moves better than Jared Goff. My question is this. Do you believe it's possible to build a Super Bowl winner with a mid-level quarterback who, with a stacked roster, can compensate for him? Or is this the only way to win? Well, I think the Lions and the 49ers are great examples, right? The other 2 teams, and really I would throw the Bills in there as well, they have highly paid quarterbacks who, on any given game, can beat you by themselves. They are 3 of, like, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. Not even talking about their accomplishments, MVPs, Pro Bowls, all the money. Just their physical gifts. Like, I've been watching football for 30 years. They are as physically gifted as any group of guys. Favre, Rodgers, what makes Peyton Manning's kind of unique. He was more his mind because he couldn't move and his arm was average, but his accuracy and he was just a genius. Tom, big time arm, but also couldn't move, was a genius. But like some of the great physical freaks, Cam Newton wasn't very accurate. Roethlisberger was pretty special. But like Jared Goff, Brock Purdy makes under $1 million. So the amount you can use on your cap is a lot of money, right? He takes, let's just make it easy for math's sake. If he makes less than $1 million and the cap is $200 million, he's 0.5% of your salary cap. Jared Goff, relative to some of these other quarterbacks, like Jared Goff's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. He makes like $24 million. A lot of people in his spot make like $40 million more. So he's relatively cheap too. And what do both those guys have? They have really good offensive play callers and they have really good skill guys, right? Could either one of those guys win with an average group around them? Probably not, if their defense wasn't good, right? But we've seen Jared Goff multiple places now win with a good team. Now, I would say this, Jared Goff and Brock Purdy. Jared Goff was the number 1 pick in the draft. He's 6'5", he's got a good arm, he's accurate, he can push the ball down the field. Like, Jared Goff's pretty talented. He's just not a good athlete relative to NFL quarterbacks. And he can't ad lib. But I think you can win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff. For sure. I doubt it was intentional, But saying beating Mahomes is a notch on your belt that no one can take away from you, mere seconds after failing to mention Burrow as one of the guys competing with Mahomes this era, is a contradiction too funny not to point out. Sometimes I forget about Joseph, partly because he's just, he got hurt this year and he's out of sight, out of mind. But obviously, Joe Burrow, elite player when healthy, and we saw a couple years ago beat him. Last year went toe to toe with them. Obviously, Burrow, you never take away beating them at Arrowhead. So the only reason I don't mention him is because he's been so out of my mind for 3 months. But that game he played this year against the 49ers, I was like, the Bengals are coming. And then in 2 weeks, everyone got hurt and they were not coming. How common are lateral moves for coordinators? I would love to reunite Burrow with Joe Brady now that Callahan is gone, but why would Brady leave Buffalo? Well, it's not only a lateral move. Does Zach Taylor allow him to call plays? Right? Does Zach Taylor want to call plays? So to me, the question always is a lateral move as a coordinator or a position coach, does your responsibility change? Because an OC with McVay is not the same as an OC for Antonio Pierce or John Harbaugh, right? So almost choked. I think it's very dependent on who you work for. So a lateral move, like if you're a coach, if you were making $1 million and you're an OC that doesn't call plays, I think you would gladly take 850 grand to call plays because you get more credit that way. It's why Eric Bieniemy went to Washington. It's like he didn't get any credit for calling the plays because Andy Reid called him. Hey, John, why does Dennis Allen still have a job? He'll start next season as a lame duck coach, just like Staley and McDaniels, who both flamed out hard. Do the Saints truly believe he is the answer? Or is it other factors like lack of coaching candidates or pride after trading Sean Payton? Well, I don't think they have pride trading Sean Payton. They did not want to lose Sean Payton. Sean Payton quit them. They didn't quit Sean Payton. Sean Payton said, I'm out. I've had enough. And then a year later, he's like, I'm back. I'm ready. Like, what? So I don't fault them in that situation. And they took the route of least resistance. They hired his coordinator, who was good, but as a head coach, I don't know, man. I think that we'll see who Atlanta hires. I mean, Carolina's not going to be any good, and Tampa just has a lot of free agency questions, right? So if you are the Saints, you go, Atlanta's a wild card because if they get Belichick, they'll clearly be better. But the Panthers are stink. And the Tampa, I mean, their quarterback's a free agent. Their star receiver's a free agent. A lot of their other players are old. I think you can go, well, why couldn't, I mean, this year we couldn't have been much worse in some of these games in the middle of the season, and we were still right there at the end of the season. So next year, if our offense is better, which I think is always easy to say as an organization, let's just hire a better offensive coordinator. Okay. Well, what if that guy's not a better offensive coordinator? Everyone thinks Luke Getsy sucks. What if it was Justin Fields? Now, I bet next year they get Caleb Williams and maybe they draft a wide receiver as well at pick 9 and their offense is way better. And you go, see? Well, it's like, yeah, they got a better quarterback and they got another offensive weapon to go with DJ Moore. So there are always a lot of variables. But I guess that's a long-winded way of saying a lot of pressure. But I actually think in a weird way, it wouldn't shock me if the Saints are better next year than they were this year. Love the pod. One of my favorite podcasts. Packer fan. Love exceeded my and many Packer fans' expectations. Looks to be the real deal. But I do worry. Sounds like Green Bay will be sitting down to extend a huge contract to him. My main thing with quarterbacks is consistency. Not just week to week, but year to year. To be honest, all we've seen from Love is 7 to 8 good games. I worry we haven't seen enough good, consistent play to pay him amongst the great quarterbacks in the league. I think anything in life, if you are going to invest a lot of money in, you better feel very, very confident. And usually with quarterbacks, right, you have several years. It was the easiest thing the Chiefs have ever done or the Bills have ever done was extend those guys. The only hesitation, I think, with the Ravens was, is this guy going to stay physically healthy? He had been injured, right? But clearly they don't regret doing that. But they had several years around these guys. the Jalen Hurts thing is a good example. He had one unreal year. Part of being a great player, like Aaron Rodgers did it for 15 years. Tom Brady and Peyton Manning did it for 20. Drew Brees did it for 15 years, year in, year out. How often does a guy get paid and then in a year, like, think they'd want that one back? Well, it's like, well, yeah, you're going off 1 year. Why would you pay him? What would be the logic to extend him this offseason? Like, will he sign 3 years, $100 million? Yeah, I'd do that. But I'm not giving him a normal quarterback contract off 8 games, and I'm a believer off what I see. But, like, what's our number here? Like, I'm not doing 5 years, $200 million. That would be malpractice, even if you are Jordan Love's biggest fan. So I hear you. Part of, like, it's easy to extend TJ Watt or Nick Bosa or Myles Garrett. Like, they have 3 or 4 straight years of kicking ass and taking names. Tyreek Hill, when Miami gave him the big contract, he'd already put together a Hall of Fame career. Same thing with Devontae Adams. Year in, year out. 8 games? I haven't read that. I mean, you're being a Packer fan, you probably read more Packer content on a daily basis. I haven't seen, I don't know if Gutekunst has talked yet. Maybe that came up in their post-season press conference, but I would just let this play out. I could extend him during the season next year. Why do I have to extend him right now? I don't think you do. Now, the argument, if you're glass half full and you're just betting on him to be an awesome player for the next 5 years, it's actually cheaper to do it now than it would be if he throws another 30 touchdowns and we win 11 games next year. And that's true. You save some money. But I do think the risk versus reward, like, is it worth paying an extra $20 million or $30 million to know and feel good about the contract than to risk something that backfires? I would wait. I would be willing to wait. You don't have enough information. Just wondering your thoughts on if the Bills should shop around Diggs. Between the drama he brings, his decline in production, and lack of leadership, I think it has run its course. The Bills' lack of down-the-field receivers, or just receivers that can separate, was painfully obvious in the Chiefs game. I've always liked Diggs. I've always thought he was a big-time player, comes through in big spots. He can play in the cold. I've always been a huge fan. Now, I understand you get to a point where it's like this just isn't quite good enough, and the margins are so thin against the best in the business that, that drop was killer. To be a great player, and at moments in his career, I've considered him like a great player. Great players make that catch. Just flip it on the other side. Do Kelsey or Hill over the course of this, I call it a rivalry, but as I talked about last week, it's hard to be a true rivalry when the Bills always lose the game. But if Kelsey and Hill are in that situation, a big play in their arms down the field, they make it. And Diggs didn't. Here's the problem. And I haven't done like the Bills cap breakdown. But if the Bills get rid of him, one, you're not trading him at this point in time in his career for a top 30 pick. So you get rid of him for a pick. The pressure then on you to nail some young receivers in the draft is really, really high. Gabe Davis has been banged up. Can you depend on him? Kincaid looks like a good ascending player. Shakir is an excellent slot receiver. That kid's a stud. But Cook's a good running back. You do need, assuming Joe Burrow comes back, they're loaded. Andy will reload. That would make me nervous. That would make me nervous to move on. But it's the NFL. Maybe you can trade for a guy. I don't know. It's a complicated situation. I don't have a great answer for you. Keep up the good work. You make me laugh, and I like how you don't get too far into the weeds. My girlfriend and I are planning on stages of starting our own podcast. It would be about what's going on in sports, improving your relationship, family, and funny stories. We came up with the idea, stoned. No, I just added that. He didn't say that. Came up with the idea because every time we travel out of state, people gravitate toward us, and after meeting us, comment on how hilarious we should start a podcast. You guys must be kind of funny. Looking for your advice since you mentioned you have a girlfriend. Without naming names, is there a genre of podcast you would listen to with her? I think the challenge is men and women typically. I know you have some ladies that listen, don't like the same content. Yeah, that would be we just listen to different stuff. Like the podcast I listen to, football, golf, and finance podcasts, are just a lot different than the podcast she listens to. So, like, I would say the podcast, we both agree we listen to the same type of music. We like the same type of music. But I would say when it comes to podcasts, content tends to be different just in general of girls I've dated. And these are girls that like sports. So, but I would say for the most part, based on the data we have, like they don't, girls, like the ratio of men to women listening to my show or just sports shows in general is heavily weighted one way. In sports radio, which is very antiquated, in terrestrial radio, they don't even factor in women. It's just men. So I don't have great advice. I would just try to do like a lifestyle podcast. If sports come up, they come up, but just talk about life stuff, you know, hanging out, boozing, relationship stuff, kids, just whatever you're doing in life, partying, relaxing, cooking, just what normal. I don't listen to a lot of those type shows, though I've heard Maria has, and I've heard kind of what they talk. They just talk about life, but I don't have a great advice for you there. Sounds like you guys are funny though when you travel. I was wondering your thoughts on the in-house hire of Dan Morgan and the assistant general manager to the general manager. How big of a role does an assistant GM typically compare to the GM? I think it depends. In some organizations, they play a massive role. Like I think Adam Peters with the 49ers played a very, very big role. I think if you look at some organizations where the GM is just doing a lot, it might be a little less. Like there are things that Howie Roseman or probably John Schneider are going to do that, might not happen at other places, right? They're just going to do a lot. So I have no clue how much Dan Morgan was or was not doing. I commented on the podcast part that when you work for a nut, and even if the nut knows what he's doing, like George Steinbrenner or Al Davis in his prime, it's hard. These are difficult roles. It's hard to work for an owner who's crazy, who doesn't know about the sport. It's hard to work for an owner that's crazy and does know. Like having an owner that's very involved and who's just, his piss is hot every day coming into work, wanting to know what the hell's going on in a sport that for 9 months of the year, not every day is crazy. But, in the stock market, for example, anyone that has any money invested, every single morning you can get up Monday through Friday and check the markets, good or bad, but something's happening. Right? In football, like not every day is crazy. Like sometimes you have to be relatively just neutral. And I wonder if that's hard for David Tepper. And it definitely gets really hard to stay neutral when you're losing. And it gets worse. So maybe Dan Morgan, his playing background, he can just figure it out because he was a badass player. I forget his injury, but he had an injury that kind of ended his career young. Big Seahawks fan, what have you been hearing about the coaching search? I'm really curious why they haven't interviewed Mike McDonald yet. I don't know John Schneider. I'd be lying if I said I had like any inside intel. It does kind of feel like they've just gravitated toward Dan Quinn before this thing even started. Now, I think Mike Vrabel would make a lot of sense there. I think Mike McDonald would make a lot of sense there. I think all these young coordinators, I'd be interviewing them all. Mike McDonald, Ben Johnson. I'd be interviewing Raheem Morris with the Rams. If I'm not going to go, Dan Quinn, they don't really need to interview, but I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I think it's actually a pretty intriguing job. They have some young talent. They have a really good GM. They have players that are used to winning. Not huge, but I mean, it's not like they've been losing. So they have a positive culture. They have guys that just have been in some big games, some big moments. They have bridge quarterback on the roster. There's a lot of mixed opinions on whether Purdy is actually good. If the 49ers don't win the Super Bowl this year, do you think they really start to have conversations of making a change at quarterback? I would say this. Purdy had a good season. That happened. Purdy had a really good offseason, good regular season. Really good. Now, the pressure on him in the playoffs, just like for any quarterback, when your team is a legit Super Bowl contender, is really, really high. So if they were to lose, like if they lose to the Lions, there's no way you can lose to the Lions and it not be a disaster. You're a big favorite. It's at home. Everyone throughout the season thought you should win this conference. Now, it's sports. It's football. You're not guaranteed to win. Like the Lions have good players too. But if you lose that game, yeah, it becomes a major conversation. I don't think anything changes if they win this game and they lose in the Super Bowl to Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. But listen, Kyle Shanahan's proven. Jimmy Garoppolo, see ya. Trey Lance, we use a bunch of capital. 2 years later, see ya. Brock Purdy's on a scholarship. And I'm a fan. Like what I witnessed this year, he's a good player. Big fan, longtime listener from Australia. You seem to be a big fan of Taysom Hill's skill set and also of Justin Fields' athletic ability. Could there be a future for Fields as a Taysom Hill type multi-role player? And if so, how much work would have to be done to catch, run, etc.? Would it be better just to persist with him as an average to below average quarterback? Interested to get your opinion. That's a good question. Again, I haven't broke down every single game Taysom Hill's played in, but when I watch him, he's a pretty natural catcher of the ball. And he can run the ball. Like part of Fields, who is an incredible athlete and great runner in the open field, most of his runs are outside the tackles. You know, Taysom Hill can just turn into a running back between the tackles and in short yardage. So Justin Fields is a better athlete than Taysom Hill, but he's clearly a better quarterback than Taysom was. But I don't know if he could just develop into that version. You know, Taysom Hill is like this hybrid, kind of like Mike Allstott meets Kyle Juszczyk. He's just a very unique player. I don't know if Justin Fields could do that because I don't think most guys could do that. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't know enough. I'd have to text buddies who have been around Fields, like as a catcher of the football. Could he play wide receiver? Because some guys have. Now, he's a good enough quarterback to keep playing, but he's a pretty average quarterback relative to the NFL. He can't throw from within the pocket. Can't function. It's not me being mean. That's just a reality. It's funny. Like whenever you just give your opinion on a player, it's like you hate this guy. No, I actually kind of liked him. I would have taken him number 2 overall in the draft. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official betting partner of the NFL playoffs, is bringing you an offer to help make the playoffs electrifying. New customers can bet $5 on any game and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook now and use code JOHN. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN John. The crown is yours. Hey, I've loved listening to All Season podcast. I have a more generalized question related to football as a whole for the mailbag. Why is the no women's NFL? We have a WNBA, women's soccer, and softball, but only recently flag football started up at my high school for women. It feels like with young women like Haley Seinfeld, Simone Biles, and Taylor Swift around the NFL, there would be a decent market of young girls who want to play football. Seems like a good business proposition for the NFL. Interesting question. Never really thought about it. I guess all I see is these hairs. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's Lolly's hairs. She was just in here. In softball, think about basketball and softball or gymnastics or whatever, lacrosse, soccer for sure. They start playing at a very, very young age. So just like boys basketball or boys, baseball or men's soccer, all these people start playing young. Well, when I was a kid, you couldn't even call it this now, but Pee Wee football was called midgets. You were in junior midgets. I didn't play actually. My first time I started playing was in 9th grade, but some of my friends played like tackle football. in like 6th, 7th grade, right? So you start playing football when you're young, no different than like being on the 7th grade basketball team or playing soccer or little league, right? That just, there is no starting spot for girls when it comes to football. No one ever does it, right? But all the other sports exist, which they gravitate toward: soccer, basketball, swimming, where I came from. A lot of, the swimming program was really big. Same with water polo. So I think it always starts at the grassroots. Like, why are we not as good at soccer as all these countries? It's not a lack of people. It's not a lack of athletes. It's because we are not as dedicated at the youth level like we are in football, basketball, and baseball. It's not a huge part of the ethos as our culture. If you go to Spain or you go to Italy or you go to France or you go to England, like, they treat that in the youth level, they take it very, very seriously. Now, I'm not saying some people in this country don't take soccer seriously young, but as a whole, it's very, uh, it's spread out because we have so many sports that people play. And the most popular sport in the country is something that a lot of young boys are going to want to play. Like, I would say most young girls don't look at playing football because there's no women to look up to playing. When I was a kid, like, who do I idolize? Michael Jordan. Well, what did I do? I want to shoot baskets. Brett Favre. What does everyone want to be at recess? The all-time quarterback. So I don't know. I've never really thought about that, but that would be, I just don't think it really exists. Do you think Anthony Richardson is being overshadowed due to CJ Stroud's success? I know he only played in 5 games. Oh, I think you just answered your own question. But in those games, he was electric. Again, he played in 5 games. And then he was injured and we never saw him again. So he's not being overshadowed. There was nothing. He broke his shoulder. Was in a sling on the sideline. Gardner Minshew was their starting quarterback. When you say Indianapolis Colts 2023, what's everyone going to say? Damn, it's incredible what Shane Steichen did with Gardner Minshew. No one's going to talk about Anthony Richardson. So it's not overshadowed. When you miss, what percentage of that? 75% of the season? It's just part of the deal. Now, if he's back next year and good, then no one will say a peep. People are like, this guy's sweet too. Maybe this guy could be the next Cam Newton, because he was kind of like this hybrid Cam Newton, Michael Vick. He looks sweet, but he got hurt in multiple games. KO'd. I'd say it's kind of concerning. Anytime you don't make it through a season and you play, that was your first season, we just go, is this guy going to be last? It might not even be fair. I mean, we may look back in 10 years, he never misses another game. But right now, I'd say the biggest question mark, he's not being overshadowed. It's before we say, hey, could he be CJ Stroud? It's like, hey, can he just start 10 straight games? Can he play a full season? Especially with the way he plays. Like CJ Stroud, we've seen that player over and over play in the NFL. Pocket quarterback. I mean, he can move a little bit, but he's not like running around. Like, a big part of Anthony Richardson's game is like the incredible running, because he's an incredible freak athlete. But he also took some shots. Actually, if I remember correctly, the play that he got injured on, it wasn't some crazy shot. He just kind of got like an innocuous tackle, like just a normal everyday play on Sunday, and it broke his shoulder. So I don't think it's fair to say that he got overshadowed. I just think we question if he can stay on the field.